Well, for more on today's report into the Victorian hotel quarantine system, I'm joined by Rachel Baxendale, state political reporter with the Australian newspaper. Good afternoon to you, Rachel. There is a lot to take in from this report. As we've just heard, do you think it was a waste of time? Was this a farce? Was this a sham?
Look, I wouldn't go quite as far as to say it was a waste of time, but certainly there are no big surprises in this report and no real answers, as many people have said. We still don't have, and I guess that's damning in itself in some ways. I think what this report highlights and the huge task that I really don't think the Premier acknowledged quite how huge this task is today, is that this has highlighted a pretty significant culture both within the Andrews government and within the Victorian public service of there just being no clear lines of accountability, no clear sort of protocols really governing who's responsible for what. I think that has really been highlighted through this report. It's almost more damning that we, at the end of all this, it's really not clear even that a particular position should have been responsible for this, let alone, which person it should have been. And I think that's what this has highlighted. And in some ways that's more damning than if we could actually point the finger at one key individual who made one key mistake.
The Premier did apologise, as we just heard this afternoon, for the very clear errors. Do you think this is too little too late?
Look, it's not the first time he's apologised. He gave a similar apology when he announced that he was setting up the Coate inquiry. He's given a couple of similar apologies since then. But really, what does it all mean until and unless there's someone there saying, well, actually, this is exactly how the mistake was made, and this is how we're going to ensure that it doesn't happen again. To some extent, I think Victoria has gone some distance towards fixing things in hotel quarantine. I say this, I'm quite critical of some of the loopholes that I think still exist in other states' hotel quarantine systems, and it took Victoria months to fix ours. It was still in as recently as September or October, I was, asking the Andrews government's questions about why in August we'd still had people who were both working in aged care and also in our hotel quarantine system, months at the height of the second wave, months after it escaped hotel quarantine the first time. It's taken Victoria a very long time to learn these lessons. I think we have made some crucial changes. I think that the fact that we're testing staff every day is something that every state should adopt. But it took Victoria far too long to learn these lessons, and I think it's fairly disturbing at the moment that other states don't seem to have been learning from our mistakes. And I guess it was, to some degree, it was convenient timing for Dan Andrews today that the problems in New South Wales that we're confronting, in the lead up to Christmas, I think if he'd sort of, been devising things himself, he couldn't have timed it better to have been, for this report to come out minutes before Gladys Berejiklian's hotel quarantine, or not so much hotel quarantine, but her announcements at 11 a.m. about the situation in New South Wales.
Well said. I did see your comments on Twitter this afternoon. I do have to agree with you on that. Look, what is the feeling in Victoria, in Melbourne? What do people want? I know that's a broad question, but what do people want from this? Because they don't have the answers as of today.
Look, I think different people want different things. I think there was one really interesting line from Justice Coate in the report that she thought the public would be shocked. And she was sort of going to, the lack of a proper Westminster system of accountability in the Andrews government. Unfortunately, I don't think the public, I don't think anyone who's been following this closely, or even not particularly closely, would have been surprised by it at all. I think people have become quite cynical about government in general, but this government in particular. And I think, I think a lot of, I don't think any of this will come as a great surprise to anyone. I think what people really do hope and what people will have a very low tolerance for is any mistakes going forward. And I really do hope that the changes that have been made to hotel quarantine ensure that that doesn't happen. But I think more broadly, as I said earlier, this has highlighted all kinds of problems in the public service, and I'm not at all confident that those will be addressed, because I think some of them are so deeply ingrained in the culture. I mean, what do you do to sort of fix I guess, management structures where no one really knows what their job is or what they're supposed to be doing and who they're supposed to be reporting to? I think it'll be very interesting to see. Daniel Andrews indicated today that essentially he'll be looking at making some announcements in response to the recommendations from the report probably towards the end of January, certainly before State Parliament sits in early February. It'll be very interesting to see what those changes actually are. And unless they're, pretty sweeping changes, it's hard to see anything changing, as significantly as it probably needs to in the Victorian public service.
Rachel, just before we let you go quickly, the Premier said this afternoon that he wouldn't resign. That's not in his nature. He will be there on the 2022 ballot. Do you think that's the case?
I think it is. I think he's essentially, we've had 3 reports now this week that have been pretty damning about the Andrews government. We, of course, also had the Ombudsman's report last week. And we also had, and that was going to the public housing lockdown, and that in a lot of ways couldn't have been more damning. We also had a pretty damning multi-party parliamentary report on contact tracing. And look, in my view, the failures in contact tracing and the failures more broadly in the Department of Health and Human Services were at least as much of a problem as hotel quarantine. If our contact tracing had been up to scratch, we could have overcome the fact that this virus escaped hotel quarantine. And look, I guess getting back to the point you were asking about, I think Daniel Andrews has sort of, had to answer some difficult questions this week as a result of those reports, but none of them have really threatened his position as Premier, and I think that's really where we're at.
All right, we'll leave it there. Rachel Baxendale, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.